You ask a student, you say, what are we doing here? What's the point of school? Normally students are going to say something about to get a better job. And it's a very impoverished kind of response, right? It's education was always about growing in wisdom, cultivating the capacity to love well, growing in virtue. But like education is just to become a cog in a big economic machine. I think most people, know that that's an impoverished vision for education, and that students want more than that as well.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Office Hours, where we examine the key trends affecting higher education and what those trends mean for students and families. Today, I sat down with Jeremy Tate, who's the founder and CEO of CLT, which is the fastest growing standardized test in the US and offers a values-driven alternative to the SAT and the ACT. This is a really interesting conversation with someone who's thinking about higher education in a very interesting and contrarian way. I think you're really going to enjoy it. Let's dive in. Hey everyone, my name is Will Geiger, co-founder of Scholarships 360. I'm really excited about today's conversation with Jeremy Tate. Jeremy is the founder of the Classical Learning Test, I believe the fastest growing standardized test in the US that's accepted by over 300 colleges and universities. Welcome, Jeremy.
Hey, Will, great to be on the pod with you.
Yeah, so one of the questions we always like to kick things off with guests is around myths and misconceptions that students and families might have. So I'm curious, Jeremy, from your vantage point, what's the biggest misconception that families have about higher ed right now?
Love this question. Yeah, yeah. Biggest misconceptions about higher ed. I think one of those is that it's just, totally not affordable. In fact, I think in some ways we're in what you might call a buyer's market, to borrow some language from the housing industry. And that really, if parents are wise, if students are smart, they can, in terms of the net tuition, what they're really paying, they can be in a better position now than they were 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think that we've been seeing a lot of headlines about college costing $100,000 a year, and I think I worry that it does a disservice to folks who might be sitting there thinking like, I don't have 100,000 like that. That's like not what we earn in a year. Not thinking about how like financial aid and discounting will make it more affordable. And I recently read some research, I think from Brookings, that shows the cost is actually going down for most families. So I think that's a great thing to call out. Um, so to shift gears a little bit, I know a lot of our students and families familiar with SAT, ACT. Kind of curious if you give us the rundown of how CLT differs.
Yeah, great question. I think I put that in kind of this misconception as well. Folks often will call it the classical learning test, and it's actually just classic, kind of like Coca-Cola Classic. And by that, we mean kind of going back to the basics. Sometimes there's this intimidation factor of, I don't know Greek, I don't know Latin. There's no Greek, there's no Latin on the CLT. So what exactly is the difference? Well, the difference is that on the CLT, you're going to be reading the kinds of texts that have been most influential in kind of driving history and culture for 2000 plus years, right? You might see a passage from Aristotle. You might see a passage from Cicero or Dante or Shakespeare. Now, you're fine, just like you are in the SAT, if you've never read that particular author before. But we do believe, given all of the time that students spend prepping, and also given the influence that the SAT and ACT have on curriculum as a whole, it really matters that on this pivotal, most important exam, the college entrance exam, that students are reading the most important kinds of text. And I hope that can also will introduce students to some of these majors in the humanities right now, right? I think with AI, philosophy is a better major than computer science. I love having that debate with people, but I think it's absolutely true. There is more value than there has been in, maybe ever, in understanding the wisdom of the ancients.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think thinking about the conventional wisdom on picking a major, right? Maybe a few decades ago, it was like learn a specific language, like maybe Mandarin. Then it was learn like computer science, and we're seeing like, with like the vibe prompt coding and just like how more affordable software engineering is getting. Like maybe that that's not going to be the most like even from a job perspective practical move. As
Yeah.
a history
What
major myself, I love that advice.
Yeah, 100%. And the ability that students need right now to be able to think about changing markets, a rapidly changing economy where a lot of the jobs, that are out there now, they're not going to exist in 5 or 10 years. And a lot of the jobs that will exist don't currently exist. And so for students to be really to know how to think, which is the aim of education in the ancient world, this is more important now than ever before.
Yeah, I have a lot of concerns. I think I mentioned to you we have a very young daughter, and thinking about her educational future, just with like students like outsourcing their brains to these LLM products and just not learning how to think, not learning how to write clearly. And I think these can be tools, but do think it's a little concerning seeing like there's a report, I think it was from Cornell, that analyzed all of these essays that were heavily written with ChatGPT and different LLM products, and they were just like generic and like devoid of any personality, which I think is
Mm,
both kind of sad and also a little alarming.
yep.
Um, with the CLT, do you think is there a ideal candidate if I'm a student or parent who's out listening to this out there who might be whether a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior in high school,
Yeah.
who's a particularly good fit?
Absolutely. Students who actually love reading are great fits for the CLT. So if you think about the SAT, one of the ways that we're different, the SAT is technically 50% math, 50% verbal. The CLT is weighted more heavily on the verbal side. We're two-thirds verbal and one-third math. Now, the math portion of the CLT is tough. There's not a calculator on the math portion of the CLT. But if you really want to showcase your ability on the verbal side, I think CLT is a great option for sure. It's 2 hours, and students, a lot of people don't know this. Students can take it from home. They take it from home through remote proctoring technology, which is really cool. So you don't have to get up, go to a school, wait in line, do all of this. We found that students really like that aspect of it as well.
Yeah, no, we'll definitely drop some links in the show notes. Now you know you also have some great resources for students who are looking to prep for the CLT a little bit, maybe just get a better sense of what the
Yeah,
exam
I
is
think
about.
I'm a big runner, John. I love cross country. No runner ever sets a personal record, a PR, their first time on a new cross country course. You've got to know where the stream is at and where the hills are and the big log you've got to jump over. And so practice tests are really important. And so we give away practice tests. A student can just create a login, and there's three full-length practice tests with answers and answer explanations and all of that in the CLT account there for you. So that's a really good way to also get a taste of it and see how you might do.
Yeah, no, I love that and appreciate you're just creating some high quality free resources for students to do those practice runs of the test with. So I know for a lot of students listening and families, affordability scholarships are top of mind. I know in Florida, one of the great things is that, and we have a lot of students in the Scholarship 360 community in Florida. And I know that CLT scores are tied to the Bright Futures program, which is an amazing scholarship financial aid program. Can you talk a little bit about how the CLT can help students access and unlock scholarships to help pay for college?
Absolutely, yeah. So Florida, I mean, it still blows my mind. This has been the case now for almost 3 years, but you get a full ride to Florida State, the University of Florida through Bright Futures. If you get a particular SAT, ACT, or CLT score. So really incredibly valuable. But it's not just that. There's 300 other colleges and universities that have tied scholarship dollars to CLT scores as well. So we've got all of that up there on our website to see that. But it starts even before that, down at the CLT 10. Now, the CLT 10 is a test designed for ninth and 10th grade students. You can also take that from home as well. And there's scholarships, even full tuition scholarships for CLT 10 national award recipients, or even regional or distinguished scholars, some scholarships there as well. So I think right now, we're in this interesting position with colleges and universities where we had basically in American history 60 years of colleges and universities just growing, growing, growing. This is after World War II, really all the way until the housing market collapses in 2008. And at that point, folks started to say, wait a minute, can we afford college? Or wait a minute, is college totally worth it? Do we all need a college degree? I think that was a good conversation for folks to start having, good questions to start asking. But what this did was it also flipped the paying for college into, again, what I would call kind of a buyer's market, right? And the reality, and I was a college counselor for years. I ran an Avid program with tons of friends in enrollment. The reality is that the colleges want great students. And if you're offered X dollars from one college and not quite as many from another, it can be a conversation. It can be a conversation with, your admissions representative. So I would encourage folks to do that as well. And even colleges that don't formally accept CLT, we're hearing this more and more right now. Folks saying, "Hey, I got this on my CLT score, and that's going to give me this scholarship here. Would you be willing to match that?" And often the answer is yes.
Yeah, no, and that was something I was curious about if how you thought about, students might be applying to a variety of different types of schools. Some might accept CLT, some might not. But that's a great call out for how you can leverage that in your process. And yeah, I think I'm really curious this year. And I think we saw this a little bit last year with there was like a story, I think it was Syracuse, that was like after the deposit deadline, going out with some like very big scholarships to try to get students to commit, and I think we're going to see just that continue to accelerate with students having just a lot more leverage in the process, which I think is just a good thing to be aware of. And um, I know that the test optional is a big trend, and I think my sort of counter to that is always you don't need to submit scores necessarily, but that will just like give you uh, an additional data point that might wind up being very very helpful and
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
save
you
you a
can
lot of
always
money.
present yeah, that's a great point. Can always present more options. You don't need to present your score if you're not happy with it, and maybe some colleges, you're gonna wanna share it, and maybe others not. You can kinda make that as you're going, but it is gonna give you kind of those additional options, as well. And speaking of options, I would encourage your listeners, apply to 6, 8, or 10, different colleges. That's generally my advice right now. And again, with that, they're competing for you, and they want you to come. And so, if you have just one college you're talking to, they're not really that incentivized, to be they know that you're coming. But if you've got, 3 or 4, that's a great thing, for them to be competing against each other to get you on campus.
Yeah, I mean, I think people forget college is a very, very big business. And for a lot of these schools, they're thinking decades down the road. And I think they're seeing, a lot of warning signs. I mean, we saw just, gosh, a few weeks ago, Elon merged, or I guess got acquired, merged, whatever terminology you want to use, with Queens in North Carolina. I know Hetchinger has done some reporting on just the acceleration of colleges closing, which, again, to your point, Jeremy, puts students and families in a good position as the it's a buyer's market. Um, and just one other thing to just kind of hit on with CLT, students can definitely they can take multiple tests. You can shop around with tests as well. It's not like you need to just like lock into one test. And I think there's a really great call out, Jeremy. Just the more skewed towards students who might be interested in humanities and sort of the
Yeah,
traditional SAT critical reading verbal section. I think for like me, I was a history major. I loved like my AP composition, AP literature, AP US, and in
yeah,
high school. And I wish that this was around for me because it would have been I think a great option where that's kind of where my my interests and more talents were versus on the mathematics side. So the testing is very personal, and I think you should be thinking about that as the test that might be a good fit for you and where you can really showcase your interests
yeah.
and talents.
Yeah, and I would say as well, don't over stress it. I hate that, a standardized test, a college entrance exam can be a huge source of stress for so many students and families. And when I graduated high school in 2000, and back then it was almost like you were your SAT score. It was like branded on your forehead. I mean, I think some kids were really demoralized by how they did on these tests. That's too much. It's a helpful data point, it's a helpful snapshot into where a student is at in some key academic areas at a given moment in time. It's not any more than that, actually. And so I think that's important to keep in mind as well. And we're excited, as you were just saying, we want to be exposing students to these timeless texts, to these great questions. One of the interesting aspects of AI right now is that the ability to use it well is kind of dependent on the ability to ask good questions, right? And that's something that is kind of uniquely cultivated in the humanities, especially disciplines like philosophy.
Yeah, no, you can have like like a tutor in almost any subject, which is really cool. Or I like sometimes like using it as like build reading guides and to sort of help me just like think through different chapters of books. And I think it can be a an asset, but it's like kind of a two-way conversation and something that you're it's a back and forth versus just having it tell you the answers, or having it do the thinking for you.
Yeah.
So one, I know, I was also associate director of college counseling. I knew you were a director of college counseling, Jeremy. I'm curious how that experience informed just like your vision for CLT as you were getting it off the ground.
Yeah, I had a number of experiences where I would call the college board. And I'd be on hold for half an hour. I'd get transferred 5 times. Feel like they're kind of annoyed. I'd be calling on behalf of my students, as a college counselor. And so one of the ideas behind CLT was saying like this needs to be a position of service. We kind of said we want to be like a Chick-fil-A of standardized testing. I don't know if you go to Chick-fil-A, Will, but I've had that experience before, where you get in line and I mean, I'm never gonna get my food. This line's a mile long, and then, like a minute later, you've got your nuggets and your waffle fries and all the right
Yeah,
sauces, and
well-oiled machine, good, great lemonade.
yeah, and they, my pleasure, and so we want to really give students a great taste of, we know this is a big thing for them. And so we really want to kind of win on what you might call the customer service front as well. So, if you call CLT, you don't talk to a bot, you talk to a human. A human has empathy, a robot does not. And so we want to be there to help students and parents as they're navigating, this difficult journey as well. So that was part of the inspiration, I think, with having served previously as a college counselor. And then also, my background was also running an SAT, ACT prep company at the same time. And seeing students were just bored out of their mind. They put the most meaningless stuff on the SAT and ACT. It's like, what are you doing? And education, I think this is really interesting. If you ask students, if you go into a high school, I would ask my students this as a college counselor, I'd ask them this as a teacher, and you ask a student, you say, what are we doing here? What's the point of school? Normally students are going to say something about to get a better job, right? They've kind of been conditioned to say that to get a better job. And it's a very impoverished kind of response, right? It's education was always about growing in wisdom or cultivating the capacity to love well, growing in virtue. But like education is just to become a cog in a big economic machine. I think most people, left, right, center, know that that's an impoverished vision for education, and that students want more than that as well. So that was the other area, is that students. I think we sell this generation short. I think young people right now are deeply interested in what I would call the eternal questions, and that's the point of college. The point of college is not to get some skill. It's not just to get a job. The college is supposed to be formative, right? I mean, you look at the kind of education that 100% of America's founders had, right? They were immersed in things like Plato's Republic, John Locke. They were immersed in Enlightenment political philosophy. These were deep, deep, deep readers, right? And that hunger is in this generation as well. And so that's why we wanted to put students in front of kind of the best of what has been thought and said.
Yeah, no, I think there is something to be said just for making making something interesting, and engaging students. I know that in a previous interview you remarked, and this is sort of related, that CLT is very tied to the school choice movement. I know school choice, parental rights, are hot topics. I think like after COVID really accelerated a lot of that. Can you expand on this idea that CLT is tied to school choice movement?
Yeah, totally. I think what school choice means in on the ground, in a scenario where everybody is basically captive to the college board at the end of the day, that the way schools are evaluated on their success is the average SAT, PSAT scores, right? Then the actual implementation of school choice really is going to be pretty limited. The College Board, the SAT, the PSAT, these are common core public school aligned assessments. And what that means is that students are not going to really be exploring, what we were just talking about, these eternal great questions that have been at the very center of education in the West for more than 2,000 years, right? So, uh, yeah, so I think very much we want to provide an alternative to the College Board, to ACT, that would be a better fit, I think. And I think that's where CLT has been able to kind of build some of what you might think of as like the critical infrastructure of this classical renewal movement, is that a lot of the classical schools have felt this pull to be doing the APs, to doing the PSAT, the SAT, and now they don't. Now it's not a detour. You should be studying the great books because they're the most important, but it's also what's on the most important tests as well.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting just to think about how mimetic both colleges and schools can be. Where, if you're looking at different high schools, it's just like a source of like pride that they offer like X number of AP classes, or they're an international baccalaureate school. And yeah, I think that's amazing to be offering an alternative option for students and for families. Yeah, I'm kind of curious on the other, would assume classical schools would be, sort of your bread and butter. There are other types of schools where you're seeing more traction. Um,
Yeah, classical schools, classical Christian schools that are not classical, classical charter schools. But here's the interesting thing: more and more in the public school arena. In fact, the majority of students taking the CLT are now public school students.
huh.
That's new. That's the first time. And again, I think we've underestimated this generation. And I think that they know that they're going into a workforce that's super transient, that the kinds of jobs are disappearing. But these eternal questions are what remain. And so I think we're going to see an uptick in philosophy majors, in history majors. And, what's interesting to me is, we're told these kinds of majors are not aimed at the career, the workforce. But so many of the really successful founders, CEOs have had an education rooted in things like Latin or philosophy. I think that's really, really important. And again, I want to stress that with your audience of, do not go to college thinking, what should I major in to get a high paying job? That is not the way to go about it. You want to go into it, and really this is a time to say, what are you interested in? What fascinates you about the world? This can be an opportunity to go really deep in that. And from that, opportunities will open up for you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think feel like I've lived this a bit, and it sounds like you have as well. Just I was a history major, worked in education, and wound up working for some startups and a company, running a company now. And it's been it's been interesting just to just see how, I think as a history major, you're thinking about change over time, writing, researching. Communicating, and just how that has translated every step of my career. Um, I'm kind of curious. I know that I think their past like decade, I think this is reversing maybe a little bit, but just like this like college for everyone sort of mentality. And I think what I'm hearing from you is sort of asterisk to like what college is, and there maybe there is some version of it that is like more workforce training. I'm kind of curious, can you like to tease that out a little bit for students who you know definitely students who want are open to exploring big questions, and studying philosophy, humanities. I think there's probably some students who are just like looking to get a job and are not really interested in that at all. And I think what's sort of challenging right now is colleges are trying to be everything for everyone. So yeah, just kind of curious, like what you sort of see the future, whether there's like a decoupling of like these two things, for students who, maybe just looking for something that's more directly tied to a trade or workforce development.
Yeah, it's such a great question. For generations, for centuries, for millennia, young people have asked the question, "Why do we have to learn this? Why do we have to learn this?" And when education is focused on the passing down of culture and civilization itself, it's really difficult to explain that to an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old. Why do we have to learn this? And unfortunately, what happened with education in the 20th century was that it turned on what is, you shouldn't have to learn things that aren't going to have practical value, right? And so take something like poetry, right? What is the practical value of poetry? Well, maybe none, right? What about theater, right? What is a practical value? Maybe none. But the way I think of it is these are not the things that lend to survival, but they're the things that kind of make survival worth it, right? These are the things that give substance and joy, to life, right? And so I think these are going to be in an age where you're not going to be able to compete with machines doing the kind of work that machines do, right? I think this is what makes me super excited about the AI revolution right now is that it's forcing a lot of us to kind of consider what is uniquely human, right? And I think that's where there's going to be, real value in terms of, jobs that we can't even begin to imagine in the future.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I worry a little bit that right now for students, they are caught in a challenging, a difficult situation where, I think colleges are trying to do a lot at once, and there is so much pressure for, career outcomes and, investing in those areas and the, college administration. I think that byproduct of driving up costs and I think making students more anxious about the investment in a college education. So I don't, yeah, that's something I
Well,
struggle with a little bit.
here's something to kind of put into the conversation, though. You think about a college like the University of Dallas or a place like Thomas Aquinas College or St. John's College right here in Annapolis. St. John's in Annapolis, there's no majors, no majors. It is great books,
Great books, yep.
deep dive only. Everybody is studying the same thing. So something really unique happens on campus though because of that, because you're all reading the same books, studying the same things, relationships run very deep. And we're moving right now into what a lot of people are calling a relationship economy, more so, than ever. Like the knowledge you have in some ways is cheap, right? Your chat GPT has almost unlimited knowledge that anybody else has access to as well, right? But relationships, and this isn't to say, use people for job security, is not what we're saying. But that when people have that kind of an experience, they're studying deeply the eternal questions together. Real deep, lasting friendships are born out of that. And then when somebody has a crazy idea of like, hey, I'm going to start a vineyard. You want to do that with me? And they're like, yeah, I think that'd be a lot of fun, right? That's how a lot of startups work. They're born out of a lot of deep relationships, deep friendships as well. So I would think about that. And when students are at a university, well, there's no serious core curriculum. Everybody kind of is doing their own thing. It has a real impact on the culture of the campus. And I think it's harder sometimes, to have those really deep relationships. So I think it's another reason to consider. And there's a lot of colleges like this. I think of a place like Grove City College or Hillsdale or Benedictine or Franciscan, that still have that serious core curriculum. That's going to be a great part of it. And that's just one more thing to add into this is you don't know what you don't know, And unfortunately, colleges, I remember when I was a college counselor, this shocked me. Colleges would sometimes come and they'd say, here, you don't have to take anything you don't want to take. If you don't want to take English, you don't have to. If you don't want to
Yeah.
take Western Civ, you don't have to. I thought, man, that sounds like a disaster, It's like if you tell a kid, you don't have to you don't have to eat meat if you don't like meat, you don't have to eat veggies if you don't like veggies, just eat what you like. And they're like, "Well,
Yeah.
I only like fruit snacks,"
Yeah.
"I only like candy." It's gonna become a very unhealthy child, and so, I think when universities are saying, "No, everybody's gonna take philosophy," everybody's going to take literature, you're going to be pushed in a way. I mean, think of it kind of like a personal trainer. You know, you can go to the gym and you'll see some results, but if you've got a trainer who's like, all right, let's go, it's go time, and they're pushing you, then you're gonna have be that become that much greater. So I'd encourage your audience to look at colleges like that.
Yeah, no, I think that's I think I really like that lens, Jeremy, of, opportunity, through the curriculum of having like additional like, touch points and things you have in common with your classmates. And I think, at a if you're at a place and you're just everything is so atomized, like you are missing out on one of the really wonderful things. I think specifically about like a residential college experience of, this idea of bringing, people together in the
Totally.
same environment.
Yeah.
You're also like working and collaborating, or have that like thing in common that you're all, taking a particular class, or every student has to, go through, have a there's a language requirement or whatever it might be. So I think that's a great thing for students to be on the lookout for, as they're thinking about college decisions. The
Yeah.
relation,
Yep. That's right.
yeah. No, yeah, I can. I mean, I think that's something. It's a very, I think in my world sometimes where we're trying to, people want data points, people like rankings. It's
Yep.
very hard to capture that into a data point or in a ranking. I think in a world where where colleges and for when students and families are looking for rankings and like, US News or Niche or, this like data point or this earnings, that is only telling part of the story. And you really do need to go deeper, just because you're not like everyone else. Your goals are going to be different. Your experience is going to be different. And
100%. Yeah.
it's kind of unsatisfying that you need to, do some of this deep thinking. And I do worry sometimes that, I saw this all the time at the independent school I was at. Students and families were just making decisions off of rankings, off of, all of these sort of like, essentially like acceptance rates, which can be completely just like engineered, with marketing, and
Yeah.
they're making big decisions based off of this versus, doing some of the harder, deeper work to really identify the like learning community and the place that's going to be a great, environment for them, but also a great launching pad, for where they're going.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's right on.
I guess speaking of parents, and curious, just experience now, you're a parent, and then when you're on the counseling side, what do you think the most appropriate role for parents is in the admissions process? I know we also have a lot of parents out there who want to help their child, but sometimes aren't sure, how they can appropriately do that.
Man, well, I got 6 kiddos and I haven't figured it out yet. My oldest, she's a sophomore in college. Her situation was kind of driven by track. She loves running. She's loved running since she was 3. She's running James Madison University, focusing on the 800 there. My next daughter, she's been obsessed with boats since she's been little. Her number one choice is the Coast Guard Academy. She's going to be applying there. I think every child is really different, and so I think that I think openness on both sides. And I remember with my first daughter, I'd say, I want you to be open-minded, and she'd say, I want you to be open-minded. And so it can be a great time actually to deepen the relationship, and I would tell her time and time again, look, my main goal is that our relationship is strengthened, not diminished from this process we're going to go through. It can be very high stress, it can be very
Mhm.
high stress.
Yeah, no, I'm sure for your daughter. She's a senior right now.
One is a senior in high
Yeah.
school, and the other is
Yeah.
a sophomore in college.
And I know senior of high school, you have your, toughest classes, your all your activities, you're sort of at the, peak of your involvement, and then you have like, tests and exams and admissions and applications. So yeah, I think that's really good advice, just to be focused on the relationship and explore it. Use it as an opportunity to, explore, be curious. I think that's kind of I think that made me sad sometimes as a school counselor. Sometimes when I would see it was just like such a like means to an end, and there was no appreciation of the journey. Just when this is a really exciting, like it's one of the like first like really big decisions you get to make about your future, where you're going to live, what you're going to be
Yeah.
studying, what type of environment you want to be in. And I think that's yeah, a missed opportunity, for experience, like, as you put it, to deepen your relationship. So last question, been constantly with our baby, just thinking about what higher ed's going to look like in the next 20 years when she's in the thick of college. Curious for if you have a take of where all of this is headed. I know there's just a lot of it's been a lot of changes in the past few years in American higher ed, and I don't see that, like, I don't see the change stopping. So
Yeah.
curious.
Yeah, I mean, I think colleges are still 25 years later, 30 years later, they're still adjusting to what we call kind of the dot-com revolution, the digital revolution, So, before the 1990s, colleges basically owned access to knowledge, right? The Harvard Library had access to knowledge you couldn't get on an iPhone. An iPhone didn't exist, of course. And now, a sixth grader, an eighth grader, with a smartphone has access to more than the Harvard Library could ever imagine, right? And so it's a very different world. So the question then presents, well, what is the value of college? And if it's not access to information, it can kind of only other be two things, as I understand it. One is essentially networking. You're going to Harvard and you're getting connected to essentially connected people, and so there's kind of the fraternity sorority impact of college, if that makes sense. But
Hmm.
the other one is much more important, I think, and the other one is formation, right? Somebody who spends 4 years at the Naval Academy or West Point, uh, at Hillsdale, you know, these schools are formative. You meet a student who spent 4 years at St. John's in Annapolis. I never meet a Johnny where I'm not like, you're the most thoughtful person. You know, they ask great questions. They love to think about things. They're super insightful. They're not threatened by people who believe different things about the world than they do. They've been doing that. They've been in classes for 4 years talking about the most important ideas with people all across the political spectrum and from every different religion as well. And they've learned to do that. So I think the future of college is going to be kind of full circle. It's going to be going back to basics, I think, in some ways, and that providing that formation that makes somebody the kind of person, I think that they want to become.
Yeah, I love that. Well, we'll end there. That's, I think, a really, like, positive note to end on. Well, thank you so much, Jeremy. Really
Yeah.
appreciate.
Hey, Will, keep up the great work. Scholarships 360s. Excited about what you're doing, and we definitely want to get your work in front of all of our students that are taking the CLT.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. We'll hope you have a great rest of the day. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to another episode of Office Hours with Will Geiger. If you're a student or parent, don't forget to check out app.scholarships360.org, where you can sign up for our free scholarship matching platform. For colleges, we've got solutions to make your work easier, which you can check out at connect.scholarships360.org. And one last thing, if you or someone you know would make a great guest on the show, I'd love to hear from you. You can always reach me by email or on LinkedIn. Until next time, thanks again for listening.